Hi, everyone. Welcome to Iron 5, the second edition, with a very special guest today. My name is Dr. Charles Lansingh. I'm the Chief Medical Officer at HelpMeSee. And today we'll be talking about several issues that are very relevant to our work. One, which is the most recent estimates on blindness and its causes, but more importantly, certainly the new directions that the World Health Organization is asking us to take into account with the recent World Health Assembly and what that evidence tells us to do. And today we have a very, very special guest, as I mentioned, Dr. Serge Resnikoff, whose CV is so long that I can't even mention, but I'll just highlight some of them. He's the former head of the Prevention of Blindness Unit of WHO, the president of the Prévention de la Cécité in France. He has appointments of the University of New South Wales, medical consultant to Lions, and it will be filled pages. So you just know the caliber of person that we have today in front of us. And Serge, thank you very much for being with us today. Serge, let's start with the first question just to kick it off, and we don't necessarily have to be very structured. But what would you consider that these two papers that we were talking about, published at the Lancet Global in December of last year and January this year, what would you consider that they're the highlights that we could bring to our audience here?
Thank you, Van, and thank you again for inviting me. It's a pleasure and honor. Turning to these two papers, I think they bring some kind of confirmation of what we've been seeing happening for now a number of years. The first thing, it somehow confirms that because of the population aging, the progress that we have been making for many, many years in developing eye care services, including, for example, cataract surgery, are somehow overtaken by the aging of the population. Because most of the eye conditions that are leading to some level of vision loss, or many of them, are age-related. So when a population is aging, the number of people with eye conditions, severe eye conditions, is also increasing. So basically what these data show is that despite all the progress, we are not keeping up with the aging and the growth of the population. So we know what to do, but we need to do it much more. The second kind of lesson that I think we can learn from there is that, with the exception of the high-income countries, cataract remains the first cause of blindness. Looking at the age-standardized prevalence, which basically means what if the population was not aging, which is a very theoretical approach, then we would see a decline in the prevalence of blindness, and especially a decline in prevalence of cataract-related blindness. The problem is the population is aging. So it somehow confirms that what we're doing is right, but it also tells us that we're not doing enough. And this is somehow everywhere in the world, with the exception of high-income countries. But as we know, high-income countries represent only 15% of the global population.
Thank you very much, Serge. And I think you mentioned something that is doing everywhere, but what about those regional variations? Because when we say high-income countries, we have obviously Europe, North America, Australia, and New Zealand, but there are obvious age structure differences in different places. What can you tell us about that?
I mean, indeed, the countries where the aging is taking place on a higher pace are in a worse position than countries where the population is still very young. in that respect, for example, the age-specific prevalence of blindness is actually lower in places like Africa than in Asia. And this is why when you look at what are the regions in the world where we have the highest levels of blindness and severe and moderate visual impairment, it is actually mostly in East and Southeast Asia, and South Asia and Southeast Asia. I mean, India, Bangladesh, Pakistan, Indonesia, these are the places where actually the prevalence of blindness is the highest, while in sub-Saharan Africa, for example, because of a relatively younger age of the kind of distribution of the population, the prevalence is somehow slightly lower. But the problem is that the population is Africa is now aging as well. It's not actually a problem. It's a normal evolution of the demographic structure, and it is also because actually the quality of life and the health systems are also making progress in Africa.
Yeah, thank you very much, Serge. And this is another component of the puzzle, if you want, is obviously the workforce. And let's start by addressing first one. I've had the pleasure of working with you in a couple of papers where we've done the analysis of the number of ophthalmologists, considering that it's probably the main driver or the head of the group. Are the number of ophthalmologists and the way that we're training them enough to tackle this problem, putting aside that we probably don't have all the mid-level personnel, but can you tell us about the ophthalmologist group?
Okay, so focusing on the ophthalmologists, I think what we have found is that the overall the population of ophthalmologists is increasing. There are more and more ophthalmologists. There are more and more people trained, which is a good thing. The problem is that this rate of increase is actually below the rate of the aging of the population. So kind of basically we are again facing the same problem. We're again facing the problem that the progress that we're making is not enough, is not coping with the aging of the population. So again, we're doing right, but we need to do much more. This is about the overall numbers, but there are many other issues about that, including the fact that just having more people is not necessarily related, not necessarily linked to a better situation in the countries for reasons that we can discuss.
Thank you, Serge. And I mean, obviously, as you said, there's not enough ophthalmologists out there, and most likely they're also not rightly located within the country. But another big issue is that mid-level or lower-level members of the eye care team and task shifting, because it's impossible for ophthalmologists to do everything. Now, what can you tell us about that?
You're absolutely right. I mean, it's important to think about what we used to call the eye care team. Ophthalmologists are not going to do everything. They're very important on the surgical aspect and dealing with severe cases, etc. But we also need to have the whole pyramid with all the different professions. And I think that maybe even more than talking about professions, what is even more important is to think in terms of competencies. Because we also need to recognize that depending on the countries, the kind of the scope of work of the different professions will be very different. There are countries where, for example, optometrists are playing a very important role. There are other countries where optometrists do not exist as a profession. There are countries where there are refractionists. There are countries where there are non-ophthalmologist cataract surgeons. the difference varies depending on local regulations, but the needs of the patients, they remain the same. And there is still the same kind of a spectrum of competencies that are needed in each and every country. And then each and every country has somehow to decide how these different competencies are distributed across the different professions. This is why I think it is really very important to think in terms of competencies and somehow plan and strategize based on these competencies. And then each country will be in position to somehow decide, I mean, what is the profession that is going to take care of this and that kind of competency.
Very important, because I think that this is very relevant to the most recent World Health Assembly resolution on the two main drivers, if you want, or the two main diseases that the World Health Organization wants us to focus on. What is the relevance that you see for this?
Well, I think WHO has been doing, I think, a very good job recently by raising the issue of these, I mean, a couple of global indicators that would somehow reflect the progress that we as a community are making in different countries, regionally and globally. And the beauty somehow of these new indicators that are called effective coverage indicators is that they are directly related to the framework of universal health coverage, which is basically that I mean, every person on this planet should have access to priority healthcare interventions, including eye care interventions, without having issues with affordability and access. So it is very important. So WHO has somehow taken as you mentioned, the two main conditions that are leading to vision loss: cataract on the one hand, and that's mainly for blindness and severe visual impairment, and uncorrected refractive errors, and this is more for moderate and mild visual impairment. But I mean, these two are somehow used as proxies about eye care in general. So the indicator combines the quality of services and the coverage. So it's basically the percentage of the people who need cataract surgery, for example, who will get cataract surgery and will have a good surgical outcome. And that's absolutely fundamental, because we know that in many places, the quality of surgery is not optimal, is not what it should be. And we have, I mean, quite a substantial amount of evidence that it can be improved, particularly when putting in place systems to monitor the outcome of cataract surgery. But what is really new here, there are two things that are new, and I think very important to take into consideration and to think about, because there are a lot of implications. The first thing is that in the past, we were using 618 as the threshold to define what is kind of good cataract surgery, or what is borderline or inappropriate. In order to keep this threshold in line with the threshold used to define vision impairment in general, WHO is recommending to use 612. So basically, we are increasing quite dramatically the number of people who will be considered as requiring cataract surgery. We will push up the thresholds for indication. I mean, which is good for the patient, which makes perfect sense. But it's an enormous additional amount of work that the countries will be facing. That's the first thing. So there is a change. There is a change. There is a shift in the threshold. The second thing is that the WHO is recommending to use a criteria for a target, which is a 30% point increase in effective coverage. So basically, for countries that used to be at 30% of effective coverage, they will need to get 60% by the year 2030. And it's even a higher shift for refractive error because they recommend to use a 40% increase as a target. This is not going to be easy. I mean, this is going to be very, very challenging. I think it's good because it will put the appropriate pressure. But that means that we will need to train a lot more people. And it's not only about training a lot more people, it's about making sure that the people that will be trained, they will have the appropriate equipment. They will have the appropriate microscope. They will have the appropriate set of instruments. They will have access to the consumables, and the patients will come. So it's a big challenge.
Yeah, you just addressed the other question which I had, because it's obviously you can set the target, but now what does that mean? How do you? It's easy to say increase this, but where's the personnel? What are the consumables and all the equipment? But more importantly, is quality of that surgery. No, as you very well said. So how do we put this concept into real practice, which is proper training of the surgeons, regardless of the category that we put them into, which will most likely be in most places ophthalmologists. But how do we address patient safety and quality of training? So what can you tell us about that, Serge?
Again, there is a growing body of evidence, and it's actually very reassuring that shows that there are ways to streamline and improve the training of ophthalmic surgeons. And just kind of focusing on cataract, there are things like the use of simulation, wet labs, dry labs. It is now really, I mean, it's clear, I think no one will argue that being trained within an environment where simulation is used is something that will make the learning curve much shorter, and that will dramatically increase the safety of the patients. And I mean, this is absolutely critical. No one would like to go for surgery to be the first patient that the resident is doing. At least I don't think I would like to be that patient. I may somehow escape that one. But I mean, I remember myself doing that patient zero. I mean, there was people around me. I mean, everything went well, but it's like flying. I mean, you can really improve the safety and the quality and the volume, and so the efficiency of the training. So I think, I mean, there is no question about that. It's more like, okay, we know that it is good. We know that that's the way to go. Like, we know that there are all these rubrics that allows to, again, like when training a pilot, you have to go through different steps, and once you master one step, you can go to the next step, etc. And you constantly check that. So I mean, this is all fantastic. This is all existing. This needs to be now put in place.
And for our audience, Serge is a pilot as well. Over and above being an extraordinary ophthalmologist, he's a pilot himself, so he knows what he's talking about.
Yeah, and I mean, I've always found that there is a lot of things to be learned. I mean, across these two sectors. Yeah, I mean, it is now. I mean, how are we going to make that in the places where there is the biggest needs for training, we are able to put in place this appropriate training. But and again, I mean, having a simulator is very good, very important. But you also need to have the right teacher. You need, and when I say the right teacher, it's not just about a good surgeon. It's about a good coach as well. It's someone who will give the confidence that will make that a person who will be using all that technology, and the technology is great because the technology helps a lot. There are a lot of kind of solutions coming through technology, but still at some point you will need to have the transition from the simulator to the real patient, and you'll need to have somebody who will be around to make sure that everything goes well, especially in terms of patient safety. Then we also need to have the appropriate policymakers that will make sure that the people who are trained, they will not all aggregate in the capital city. They will also work in places where the patients are. And it doesn't mean to put, I mean, a surgeon in every village. This is not going to work. It's a nonsense. But there are ways of addressing that through outreach services, through system developments. But all these kind of things need to work hand in hand with the training.
Thank you, Serge. Probably I mean, you hit the nail on the head. I mean, it's you really addressed. Someone said that the simulator simulates, but an instructor really teaches. No, and I think you need someone to really guide you and give you the right combination of complicated cases or complications during surgery, so you can learn how to solve them. No, and I think as when you're talking about policy, probably the last point that I would like to touch for our audience is we know that universal health care and particularly eye care has an impact on systems development and also on development goals, which are extremely important because this is the type of things that many governments understand. How can we put this now towards all our friends out there that we can help push the agenda and policy that will work, in this case, with cataract training and systems development?
Thank you, Ben. I think you're making a very important point because I mean, I'm an ophthalmologist. I spend most of my time doing surgery, and I was only interested in doing surgery. I mean, hopefully good surgery. But I mean, I was obsessed by having a patient with a clear cornea and a round pupil the next day. And it took me some time to understand that patient satisfaction is very important. And it took me a long time, too long time. And B, that I can only work if there is a system in place around me and their resources. And that all this is made by people who they're not really interested in surgery, and they're interested in the system, and that's good. But they are using their own frameworks that are not clinical, that are not surgical. And as you very rightly said, currently the mental framework in which policymakers are operating is the framework of the Sustainable Development Goals. Kind of, we like it or not, I mean, this is what is happening, and this is the way things are somehow benchmarked. The good thing is that there have been a number of people who started in our sector to think about all that very seriously. And I must say that IPB, for example, I think have been doing a great job in recent times to somehow get us aligned with these kind of things. As you know, they're doing good progress to have the UN, not WHO, the UN, recognizing that eye health is part of health in general and part and contributing significantly to the Sustainable Development Goals, and not only in the health area, but also in education, in poverty alleviation, in economic development, education, etc., etc. And I would encourage you, colleagues and friends, to have a look at the Lancet Commission report that has been recently published, that is freely available, and there is a full section there about how to frame eye health within the SDG framework. And I really encourage anyone who has an interest in that, and probably mostly the people who have never really thought about that before, to have a look to that section, and maybe then this is something that HelpMeSee could consider somehow, I don't know, share the link or something so that the people could have access to that.
Most definitely, Serge. Thank you very much. And as usual, it's always a pleasure speaking to you, Serge, and time flies. So much to learn from you. And hopefully we'll get to meet at the AAO and have a discussion over a nice glass of wine. Well, in New Orleans, it'll probably have to be something else, but near Bourbon Street or something like that. But it's always a pleasure, Serge. Thank you very much for your time, and best regards to everyone in your family as well.
Thank you, Van. It has been a pleasure, and I really enjoy and support the work that HelpMeSee has been doing. But it's just fantastic. Thank you.
Thank you, Serge.
I'm Professor Serge Resnikoff for HelpMeSee.
And I'm Dr. Van Charles Lansingh, the Chief Medical Officer for HelpMeSee.